Well, thank you all for coming tonight to share some of your memories and stories about growing up in this church, being part of this church, to help us celebrate our 150th anniversary of First Presbyterian Newton. I'd like to start by having you each tell us your name and a little bit about how you got involved in this church. Kay, how about we start with you?
Well, my name is Kay. My maiden name was Beitler, and my parents were members at First Presbyterian at 7th and Main. So I've been around a long time.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. Phil, how about you?
Well, marriage brought me to this church. I drove all night from Fort Hood, Texas in 1954 to get married to Jan Gray. And I'm probably the only member of the church today that was married in the old church.
Wow.
1954.
How many miles did you drive?
Fort Hood, Texas is good 10 hours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, how about you? Tell us your name also.
Oh, Karen Wilson. My maiden name is Manning. And when my mom was a little girl, about 10 years old, her mom and dad heard about this revival that was in a church, going to be in a church in Newton. And so they went to that revival. It was a 2-week revival, and it was at the First Presbyterian Church.
Oh, really?
And so that's how they went ahead, and they just kept going. And so my mom was raised in the church, and then I, of course, was too. So,
Wow.
and that was at 7th and Main.
Yeah.
I'm Sue Ice, and I joined the church in 1961 when we came back here after my husband had finished law school. And we had been married, we had gotten married while he was in the Navy, serving out his required 3 years after going through KU in the NROTC program. And Nancy was 6 months old, and Laura was almost 3. And that was when I joined in 1961 when we came back.
Wow. I wasn't even born then. That's amazing. Thank you, Sue. Paul, would you introduce yourself and tell us when you joined the church?
Yeah, I'm Paul DuBois, and I joined the church. Well, it would have been in the 50s when Lloyd Weiser was here, I believe it was.
Wow.
And I grew up in a church. I was born in a church family, so it was just as soon as I could go to Cradle Row or whatever we called it then. From there on, I've been with this church.
It's the 1950s.
So I'm 80 now. So
Wow. Thank you. Sandy, will you introduce yourself and when did you join?
I'm Sandy Larson, and my real name is Sandra Larson, and I was born of Helen and Art Kaiser. And actually, I've been a part of this church ever since I was born in 1944. And so I have lots of memories from growing up in the old church and in the new church. And I actually became a member probably in the late 50s when I actually joined the church, but I've been a part ever since I was born.
Okay, so your family was members already before.
Yes.
So how about we talk about how many generations of your family have been part of this church? Would you care to share?
Yes, we have 4 generations, my mom and my dad, and I also have an older brother who's deceased. And then it would be myself, and then my daughter and my son, and then my daughter's 2 children are members.
4 generations.
4 generations.
Paul, you said that you were in Cradle Row. So does that mean that there was a generation before you that's been a member of this church?
Yeah, my grandparents, John and Anna Prather, and then my folks, and then my generation, they are my brothers. We have 4 brothers, and then the ones that was our kids.
So your kids, and then is there any more generations?
So not that joined the church.
So 4, is that right?
Uh-huh.
And there's even more generations of your children and grandchildren out here
Yeah,
too,
there's a couple
that
more
I
of them.
remember growing up with or being here with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sue, how about for you?
Well, 4 generations, if you count our 3 children. Ted's parents, Mildred and Fred Ice, and and then Ted and I, and then our 3 children. And I'm not sure, possibly 4. I think that Ted's grandfather, Ezra Bernine, left the Methodist Church, and I'm not sure whether he joined the Presbyterian Church.
Wow.
So there are at least 3.
Wow.
Well, in my instance, it's just my parents and me in Newton. But my mother was a Presbyterian, and that goes back forever. I mean, they've always been. Her family was always Presbyterian, so that goes back to, I guess, the 1700s or 1600s. Well, real long they go back.
Wow. Kieran, how about for you?
3 generations.
And Phil?
Well, I'm a native Newtonian, but actually with marrying a Presbyterian, again, Jan Gray, her folks were longtime members, Edith and Milton Gray, but like I say, I'm a first generation, my family is.
Well, and then how many, so your wife's parents, and then your generation, and then how many more since then?
Well, I have 5 grandchildren that were baptized in this church, and so I hang on to that, but that's my connection. I'm really the first generation, I guess.
Did any of you attend the old church, the first church building?
I visited there when Ted and I were dating, and I think it was the weekend that we got engaged, and I was in Newton and visited in the old church, and that was lovely.
Yeah.
Church.
Did you say you attended the old church?
Well, yeah, I grew up in that. It actually used to be 2 buildings put together, and part had the cradle row, and then the classes part was moved in, and that was. I think I was in the last class for being a member.
Okay, where was Cradle Row in the church?
It was clear to the east.
Front or back?
Yeah, clear in the east end of the add-on. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. How about you?
My earliest memory, of course, I'm with Paul. I grew up was in the cradle roll room,
Wow.
is what it was called. Was actually in one of the turret sections, which was a rounded area on the southeast corner of the main building. And what I remember is everything was white in there. The chairs, little tiny chairs, were all white. The walls were white. And that's my earliest memory, that the old church held lots of nooks and crannies to hide in as young kids. And we knew the church well as we would go and explore all the different areas of the church.
I talked to both of my sisters about this, and we all remember, what we remember is the stairs going downstairs, because we went down there to Sunday school. I seem to remember there was an outside stairs, but nobody else seems to remember that. So maybe I'm remembering wrong. But it was just the stairs going downstairs. And then my mom always tells the story about my younger sister. We always sat on the front row of the church, and the choir was up in the front. And so when my younger sister was crawling, I don't know how old she was just crawling. She got away from my mom during the service and crawled all up, clear up up the steps and into the choir loft. And
That's quite a ways.
yeah, she wanted to sing, I guess. But anyway, that's always been kind of a funny story that she used to tell about my younger sister. And of course, my dad is very even-tempered, and he was like, "It'll be okay. It'll be all right." And my mom was just about ready to go crazy because she was embarrassed that she had let her go. But anyway, it was kind of a funny story.
Well, you all indicated you went to that old church. Kay, what do you remember?
That church was, well, I thought it was beautiful, but maybe I'm wrong. The red brick, it was just all that brick and the arches at the front of the church, and it had like I don't know, getting into the church, you went up the stairs and this walkway to the door to go into the, I guess you call it vestibule, before you go into the
Sanctuary.
yeah, sanctuary. And I mean, it was really ornate, so much more ornate than the church now. I mean, there was a lot of different colors involved with there was like painting on the ceilings, I remember, and the stained glass. It wasn't just like the striped stained glass here. It was a picture depicting a picture, in stained glass. Was really beautiful. Yeah.
Phil, what do you remember?
Well, the church at 7th and Main was, I tell you, it was the sanctuary came from a church on West 6th in Newton in the early 1900s. But I think in 1901, they moved that church to 7th and Main, and that became the sanctuary. But as all of us agree that ever attended there, the small rooms, but it had lots of atmosphere.
And as a little girl, it seemed huge, didn't it?
Oh,
Very
it was
mammoth.
immense. Yeah.
Well, for those of us that weren't around during those days, would you give us some context? What was going on in the world, Sue, in the 61 when you joined the church?
Well, I really don't remember anything specifically. Elvis was a thing, and I don't believe that. I'm not sure that the Beatles had come in yet, but we were relatively at peace. The Vietnam War hadn't picked up yet, and the Korean War was over. So, and as far as what was going on in Newton, I don't remember anything specifically.
So were you an Elvis fan?
No, I wasn't. I saw the first show that he was on, the Ed Sullivan Show.
Wow. Paul or Sandra, do you have any memories about what was going on in the world back then?
Well, we didn't get to watch it on color TV back then. And if we had a TV, it was black and white. And so you just had to go back by the years and we looked through it.
Yeah. How many channels on the TV?
Started out with one, but it had Oklahoma City,
Wow.
and then just gradually worked up from that. it wasn't like the TV we have now.
Yeah.
It was, we'd get a glimpse of the picture once in a while, and a bunch of snow.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you remember about what was going on in the world?
Well, when I was born, it was the World War II was still going on, and I cheated and I went online and looked to see what else was happening, and it noted that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected to a record of 4 years, fourth year as president. And then when I joined the church, and I think that was 1956 thereabouts, and of course, like Sue was saying, Elvis had his first appearance and his first TV appearance. And then in the 60s, of course, the Vietnam War, 62, the Vietnam War started. So a lot of different things going on.
Bill, you have something.
Well, again, I came back to Newton after serving in the service, and the Presbyterian Church was a good part of my life at that time. But the Korean War had just ended, and things were kind of in an uproar. But the church at 7th and Main was well attended. I do remember there was a front door off of Main, but everybody used the side door on 7th Street. The whole
Yeah.
congregation, because they went right into the main part of the church.
What else was going on in Newton back then? Anything you remember?
Oh, I was 5 years old. I mean, I was baptized in that church, so I don't really know too much of what was going on in the world at that time.
Are you sure you weren't the one crawling up into the?
No, I wasn't. But I would have if I'd had the opportunity.
I think my mom used to talk about there was a grocery store on every corner, back then. And of course, nothing was open on Sunday
Yeah,
at all.
Well, Gerald's was right across 7th Street, wasn't it?
Yes, it was right across the street. But I'm kind of like her. I was just a little girl,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah.
There was a vital retail community. You had Montgomery Wards,
Yeah.
and as I said, all the grocery stores. And,
Hogan's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
It would-
Lots to do.
I would say, being in retail myself, that was the main
Yeah,
thing.
sure. Phil, how long have you been in retail in Newton?
Well, I started at my family business after graduation from Wichita State in 1958, and been there ever since. But,
Wow. Well, those are some of your memories of what was going on outside of church. I'm curious, what are some of your earliest or best memories about what happened in the church in your life?
Floyd Kaiser was the pastor then when I joined. And I remember being so impressed, and I still am impressed with the fact that during the time that he was here, there were, I believe, 5 young men who went into the seminary and went to seminary and became pastors. And one was Sandy's brother, and Don Schroeder, and Monty Fay, and Bill Hickerson, and who else, Sandy?
That was it during that time.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I always thought that was really amazing. And then the next pastor after Floyd was that Louis Dale?
No,
No,
there were
there
a
was
couple
another.
others in between there.
Yeah. So anyway, that, and the congregation was a lot larger. I still have a picture of the 75th anniversary, I believe it was, and they took a picture of the whole congregation. The church was just packed with men. There were that many members.
Yeah. Any other memories from the church? Some of your most special memories?
Oh, there was a lot more people and a lot more of my neighbors, and I was going through the list this morning a little bit, and my goodness, there's hardly any of those names in our church anymore. And I knew about every one of them, and I missed that. I think, who's left?
Yes.
And some of them will move away, some of them will die, some of them will just quit going, and some of them will go to another congregation. And things I remember, like we had a lot more active young people between high school and adult. It was kind of set up for when you graduate high school, then you go to class with your parents. Well, that just didn't really seem right. And so we had a real active group in between there, which kind of missed now.
Yeah.
And I was in the last communicants class at the old church, and the first wedding at our new church in the chapel.
Sandra, do you have any special memories from the church growing up?
Too many to recount, being this old. From the old church, the best memories are probably the youth group, because we had large youth groups, both junior high and senior high, and going on retreats, and sometimes we would get to go to conferences or seminars in Wichita, and I remember spending a week at College of Emporia, in Emporia, and going to Camp Winds in Ponca City. Oh, what fun that was! That was summer retreat, and then all of the activities, like they said, that there were so many members, and so the church was always full. Anything that went on in the church, it was always full of people. Parents belonging to mariners and cruisers, and having potluck dinners there, and then being in a church where my last name was Kaiser, and our minister was Reverend Floyd Kaiser. Everybody thought that we were related somehow. And so we always had to explain, no, we're not related at all. Just happened, and it was spelled the same too. So that was unusual. And then here in this church, I remember the first, I've been married in this church by different ministers. And my brother was ordained as a Presbyterian minister in this church. He gave the Sunday morning sermon, and then they had a reception for him after the ordination.
My memories are that, like most churches, it was well attended. The sanctuary was always full. And the downside that today is that a lot of churches don't have the young generations joining. But we certainly remember it as being a packed church every Sunday. And again, fellowship's a big thing.
Coming here, I thought it was quite fancy.
Oh,
Just fancy. It was just modern, very modern. And of course, we went to Sunday school always in the basement. And they had these little red chairs, green and all different colors, little chairs. And a number of years ago, they decided to get rid of those and get some others. And so my mom said, would you like to have some? And my girls were little at the time, so I still have some of those chairs.
oh, wow.
Yeah. And of course, we went to camp in the summer,
Oh, yeah.
some youth group.
Okay, do you have any early memories of this church?
Oh, well, it would have been 1964, so I was a teenager, and, teenagers really are not interested in
That's
Yeah.
true.
so it was But we went from no air conditioning on the hot summer days to beautiful, wonderful air conditioning. That's what I remember the most. Yeah.
Speaking of special events, the church, you're describing the church as a big community place. Lots happened. People came together. Your neighbors came to church with you, and there was so much going on. And the church is a part of so many special events like weddings and funerals and other things. Do you have memories of any special events in your life or in your family that happened in this church?
Well, the baptism of Nancy and then our son. And I remember a number of special kind of evangelistic events when Louis Dale was the minister. We had some wonderful over 2 or 3 days events where people, it was during those that I really felt my faith really came together.
Any other special events in your family? You were starting to say something.
I was married twice in this church, once in the chapel and once, this they call it renewal of vows.
Yeah.
And we've had several marriages there that are both my daughters, and we've had a lot of celebrations here in the family, and then other events that we went to. I mentioned this young folks group. We did a lot of things, camps and such. We went to Joyland.
Joyland.
Remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
I've had 2 sons get married here in the church, and like I say, the baptism. So those are the things you remember.
Yeah, when we talk about fellowship, the church used to be such a bigger part of the different events in our lives. Anything else in your lives, family events that were celebrated here?
Mike and I were married here in 1974. Reverend Louis Dale. We talked to him and he said, okay, you're married. In so many words, but Mike was a member of First Mennonite Church at the time, and so his minister came and gave a little lecture on marital bliss and all kinds of stuff like that, you know, being true Christians. And yeah, so it was.
What about for you, Karen?
Well, I was married in this church also, and so was my 2 sisters. Louis Dale married us, and I was 18 and Bill had just turned 19, and that was in 1967. And at the altar, Bill and I started giggling about something, and Reverend Dale got after us. He said, "This is serious. You kids need to quit laughing." We laugh about that many times, but and then my folks, they celebrated their 40th and 50th wedding anniversaries here. Had a huge turnout, of course. They were, you know, and then I remember Mom always worked in the kitchen. My dad always was the Sunday school guy that collected all the money, and then he is in the office counting the money during church. And I think that's part of the reason why he everybody kind of knew him because
Yeah.
he was, of course, he'd been here forever, but, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, and my parents, I'm sorry to interrupt,
No, no.
but my parents celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary in 1995 here in this building. So that was kind of neat. I don't know how long it makes 65 or 60 years.
Yeah.
Well,
Mom
so-
was,
No, go ahead.
my mom was very famous for her peanut butter cake. Anytime they had any dinners, and they used to have a lot of
Yeah,
dinners
yeah.
here, she would make this peanut butter sheet cake, and it was really neat at her funeral. That's what they served, and I thought that was so special of them to do that.
And there's probably a recipe for that cake named after her.
Probably
Geneva man.
peanut butter cake.
So, were you gonna say something, Phil?
Oh, I just, like most members, eventually when you belong to the church for a while, you end up serving on the deacons and sessions. One thing I remember the most on several terms of session is talking Nate Regier into coming in as a session member.
What do you value the most about being a member of this church?
I valued most the friendships and the getting to know people better. And I think that has been a value of our church being smaller, because I didn't, when it was as large as it was, I didn't feel like I knew a lot of the people, a lot of the members, and I have felt in the last 10 or 12 years like I have felt close to most of the members, and I think there's value, and we don't like to. We want to grow, but there's value also in being a smaller church.
I enjoyed it being big because we had so many friends. And now we're down to if you're friend with everybody in church. That's the world changes, so the way we react changes.
Sandra, what do you value most about this church?
I agree with them. The friendships developed through Christ and in our church. And as I remember back to the old church and this church, or the older members, each generation, I enjoyed so many members that I knew during each generation. And as I knew them as a little girl and looked up to them, and then the next generation would, they would kind of die, and then you had older, and you looked up to them, and like Paul's parents and grandparents, I knew them. And then you just keep moving on through newer generations, and you make more and more friendships, and it's valuable. It helps be close because you've got them. If anything happens, they're there to support you.
Yeah.
Fellowship. I think that's important in any church, and that's what I value.
Well, that's kind of, I think what's really important in most churches is the fellowship of the congregation.
Yeah.
If it's not there, you're not going to have attendance. And, if you feel like you want to be with your friends, you come to church.
Yeah.
That's one way. Yeah.
Karen, how about for you?
Yeah.
I think definitely the fellowship. Yeah, we were gone for many years, but coming back, everybody was so friendly and nice, and we just felt at home immediately. And I think that is important and very important.
Yeah. If you were talking to a young couple or someone that had just come to town or someone new to the community, and you were to tell them why they should come to this church, what would you say?
I have talked to people who have just come to church, and I said, we'd really like for you to visit our church and see. I think you would find that it's a warm, welcoming church. And and I think it's important for people to reach out when someone new comes to town and invite them to come visit us.
I think that is the warmth of the church. I've heard both ways, you know, in the old church and in this church, there were times when maybe some individual would say, well, they didn't feel comfortable, but most often people have said that we have a warm church, and that's good to hear.
Paul, you mentioned change.
Mhm.
We haven't really talked about change, and I'm curious, what is a significant change that this church has gone through? What change have you seen in all these years?
Things aren't as stiff. We're, we can say things, do things that we couldn't before. That's good.
More casual dress. I remember when, I mean, it hasn't been that long at all, that men always wore coats and ties, and then back in time, women, you wouldn't go to church without a hat and gloves.
I think the worship service has changed dramatically from when I was little to now. Of course, it was always longer. The ministers preached a lot longer sermon, and there was more in it, the long prayers, and that has changed. The worship service itself has changed a lot.
That's tough. I hit on it earlier. Just getting new members is a big challenge,
Yeah.
and I know that's true in all churches.
Yes, it is.
Sanctuaries aren't as full as they used to be.
Yeah.
And I think COVID really made that a problem.
Yeah.
People didn't come back.
Yeah.
And they might still be watching at home, but
Yeah.
it's not the same. You don't get the fellowship
No.
then, and that's kind of sad.
Yeah. This COVID stuff really, I'm sure it's like any other disease, like, you know, measles, mumps, you know, I'm sure that had the same kind of effect on people at one point before there were vaccines for that and polio and that.
I do appreciate the way the pastor, and I think Reverend Anderson did that also, preached the word. He preached from the word. He doesn't just give his opinion. He uses scripture, and I think that's really important. It's very good to see that.
People have asked, what's the difference between the old church and the new church? And I knew the old church well because I was just in high school when we moved from the old church to this church. And the old church was large, as I remember it, and beautiful, with the old beautiful dark wood and the big pipes in the front of the church. And I remember singing in the choir there as high school, and it was old and beautiful. But this church is new and lovely, and so different, but yet in their own respects are equally beautiful. And I think that there's so much difference between the two.
you mentioned the differences in the church. I think, you know, it's hard for us to grow up from one way of doing things into another.
Yeah.
And then the choir is one. We sit up front. I sang in the choir for a little while till I had an accident and messed up my voice. But there's just things that are different, and then that's about life anyway. Things change, and we have to get used to them. But have good memories in the church.
I've loved singing in the choir for so many years, and it's just been the last 3 years that I haven't been able to sing in the choir because my vision has become worse, and it's hard to read the music, so I haven't. But what I have loved about our church is that music is such an important part of our worship service.
I have one more thing to say about, we talk about singing in the choir. In the old church, we had to leave Sunday school, rush to the robe room, put a robe on, because you had to sit up in front of everybody. And so there was always time element there that was rush, 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 get in your robe, line up, come in at the proper time in a row. And in this church, with the being at the back, we decided we didn't need to use the robes anymore. So that was a good thing.
Well, for those that might be watching this video in 5 years or 10 years or 50 years from now, we're just coming out of COVID, a pretty significant event in the life of this church where for the last 18 months to 2 years, we've not been able to gather in the same way that we gathered. And now we're starting to come back together. We're meeting in person. Anything significant that you've learned about our church or experienced as we've weathered this storm together?
To be bold and take steps forward when we agree that it's time to step forward and to be bold about it, but still be safe, but just to move forward and not let it overtake us.
That we're strong. We can stick together while we're separated, you know. We believe in the church, and that makes us a part of the church.
And I will commend the church leadership for the way they've handled COVID. And I've been real impressed with that. You know, certain Sundays they close down, but it seems like they've been very cautious.
Yeah.
Karen, as you've kind of gotten back involved and hear anything you've learned about our church or realized about our community through this pandemic?
Well, just the friendliness of the people and the welcoming that they gave us to just, you know, and accept us. And I think it's an important part of any community to have good, strong churches. I really pray that people will see the need to come to church, whether it be this one or wherever. It's important to families, I think.
I think communication has been good.
Yeah.
You're not able to have church dinners anymore, but I have been impressed with communication when something's changed or something. I think that's important for the congregation. But I think they've done everything they can.
I can't wait till we can eat peanut butter sheet cake.
Yeah.
I'll bring it.
Yeah. But 150 years from now, if you were going to put a blessing, a wish, some advice into a time capsule for the people sitting in your seats the next time around, what would you like to say to them?
I would say, even if you don't serve on a committee, come to church. I think that's so important. It's just, we've talked earlier of the fellowship, but it's, I would impress anyone years from now to remember that.
Anything else?
Well, yes, I think coming to church, but creating a giving heart and be close to the people who are in the church. You know, you're always say birds of a feather flock together. You know, sometimes it's really important to flock together, you know, especially in a church setting where we all come from different backgrounds, different work ethics, but we all come together because our belief in God and the love of Jesus Christ.
Karen, do you have any blessings or wishes or advice?
I would hope that in 150 years, this church would still be staying true to the Word of God
Yes.
and how important that is. And also the fact that Jesus Christ can see us through anything. He's seen us through this pandemic and through wars, and the Lord can, if you just trust in Him, He'll see you through. It doesn't always mean things are going to turn out wonderful, but the strength that you get from the Word of God and from Jesus Christ and the fellowship with other believers, you can't beat it.
Well, it makes you stronger.
It does. It does. It does.
I'm so happy to have been a part of this church. Mike's a member. When we married, he remained a Mennonite for years, and finally I converted him. I don't know that I converted him.
Well, Phil converted me first to a Jayhawk, right? To a Presbyterian.
Well, I think it's important. It really is a church. I did not grow up in a church, so I can vouch for that. That, like we've talked about, it's important to be a member.
Well, I hope that there are people here in 150 years. I kind of wonder with our changing climate, and I hope that there are people here. So it's hard to imagine what it will be like, but I hope it goes on, and I hope the church is still here.
I hope that people keep it strong, that they keep the friendships going, and that they are blessed by the Almighty God to keep this church formed and going strong in any sizable capacity. As you know, where there are two or more gathered together, you know, it's important. We have to keep the faith.
That's been 10 years, so.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you've been to this church over the years, and for sharing your story so that we can learn from it, and so that future generations can hear and hear some of the history.